Hey guys, welcome back to Dan's Chess Lounge. Today I'm going to go over the exchange variation of the Queen's Gambit declined. The exchange variation is a line that I've played for many years, and it's a line where if White does not want to uh, memorize tons and tons of theory, then that's the type of opening that they can play and play well. Some lines in the Queen's Gambit decline run up to 25 or 30 moves deep before anyone is out of book. So the chess game turns into a theory game, basically. And that's not really the type of chess that I enjoy playing. One, because I don't have the time to study chess like that. I have other things going on in my life. So the Queen's Gambit exchange variation is a way where you can know a few ideas and motifs and you can play pretty good chess. Let's go ahead and get into it. The game that I have to follow was played between Mikhail Botvinnik and Karl Robatsch, and it was played in 1966. Let's go ahead and get into the opening and see what it's all about here. Starts off 1d4, Queen's Pawn opening. The D pawn stakes a claim in the center, occupies these central squares right away, and it's a fight for the center. Also, the dark square bishop is released, and the queen protects this pawn here. So the D pawn has immediate protection right away. Whereas if you open up with the E pawn, there's nothing that protects it and nothing supports it, and that's why there's an attack on it immediately. So going forward, D5, C4. Now you have the Queen's Gambit. If Black accepts the pawn, then that will turn into the Queen's Gambit accepted. We're not covering that variation today. We're going over the exchange variation. Here, White hopes that Black will take the pawn, though, and that way, when White recaptures the pawn, he'll have a lead in development, and also, White will also have two pawns here that can be in the center, and opposed to Black's just one pawn here. So Black will be behind in development, and White will have two pawns in the center, taking away space. So it's all about a fight for space. E6. This initiates the Queen's Gambit declined. Black protects the D pawn there with his own pawn. The downside is this light square bishop here on C8. It's blocked in behind its own pawn chain. So therefore, Black is going to have a less ambitious opening. He's not going to be able to play as aggressively, whereas if the bishop was outside of the pawn chain. Knight C3, Knight F6, C takes D, and you have E takes D here. Now, it's perfectly normal and fine for Black to capture with the knight. A lot of games Black will capture with the knight here, and it's just a different approach. It's a different type of game. The positions are completely different. So if you do play the exchange variation, you're going to need to know what happens if the knight captures. E4 is the main move here. The knight captures, pawn captures, and White gets this very nice center here, but then Black will be able to pick it apart and start to try to break it up with moves like C5 and Knight C6. And sometimes Black will even fianchetto the bishop here, and will try to attack the center, and White will do his best to hold the center. And it's a good dynamic game. It's similar to a Grunfeld defense, the pawn structure. So if you like those type of positions, then you should look into this variation of the exchange variation. Let's go back to the main move though, which is the pawn captures, e takes d. And so here black is happy that white went into the exchange variation because now his bishop that was locked in is no longer locked in. It's free now. So black is happy about that. Again, white is happy to play that variation because they don't have to memorize 25 moves in the orthodox Queen's Gambit decline. So white is very happy that he can play a game that he's familiar with and comfortable with. Black's happy. So everyone, it's a win-win for both parties at this point. Bishop g5. This is threatening to remove this knight here. And then if black captures with the queen, that loses this pawn here. And so that forces black to capture with the pawn, the g pawn here. And then black's structure will be destroyed. Kingside structure will be destroyed. So c6 reinforces the pawn on d5. That way that avoids any of that. And e3. So right here you have the main, I guess, tabiat position of the exchange variation. So you should at least know up to here and know the ideas after this move right here, which is white has two viable options. White can play a minority attack, which is where they swing the rook over the b1 and then push the pawns b4, a4, b5, attacking the pawn here in c6. So what's going to happen after that? Black is going to be left with a destroyed pawn structure on the king side, and then white can pick off and play against the backwards c pawn. Or if black captures the b pawn over here on b5, that would be on b5, then black would have this isoed pawn right here on d5, and again white can try to play against that. So basically it gives white playable options and targets and things like that. White white also plays, now this strategy is played more with strong players. A lot of times they'll play in the center. They'll push f3 and then e4 when the timing is right. They don't just push f3 and e4 back to back. Usually they have to set it up and they have to prepare it, make sure their position isn't in any trouble, and then they'll push e4 and then they'll break through in the center and it'll be a big battle in the center. Let's continue and see what happened in this game. So black played bishop e7, queen c2. This is a good move here, which stops this bishop from coming to the f5 square and controlling this powerful diagonal there. So now you have castles. Bishop d3 sets up the battery, hitting the h7 square. If white can remove the defender, this knight here, then he might be able to pick off a pawn on h7. Knight b to d7. And you can see as well in this game, in these type of positions here, black always has less space than white. White has a lot easier and a more comfortable game to play. That's why I like these positions for white. I mean, look at black's light square bishop. Now it has the knight in front of it. Before it was blocked in by its own pawn on e6. Now it's blocked in by its piece. So there are a lot more passive positions for black than white. Knight f3, rook e8. The knight is going to come to f8, and then a lot of times it will go to g6 here if it wants to attack on the king side. So it's like being rerouted to the other side. Black is down in space, so the idea here is for black to play knight e4, and then that way the bishops will be facing off, and then black can trade some pieces. Black can trade the knight on e4 for a piece. The bishops can be traded, and then that way black will have more space. You have castle, knight f8, rook ae1. So with this move here, it signifies that white is not going to go for a minority attack, because if he wanted to do that, he would have played knight to b1 here and then pushed his pawn to b4, a4, b5. So that move there lets us know that he wants to go for a central attack, f3, e4, when the timing is right. Knight e4, black is continuing with his plan of trying to simplify the position so he can have more space. Bishop takes, queen takes, bishop takes, pawn takes, and then the knight goes to d2. So if we stop and evaluate the position, we can see that black has accomplished his first goal and plan of exchanging a couple pieces. So now he has a lot more breathing room and where he can maneuver his pieces around. So that's mission 1 accomplished for black. White is still trying to accomplish what he wants to do. He wants to play in the center. He's going to push his pawns in the center, f3, and then he has to eliminate this pawn with the f3 move, and then he can push e4. So first things first, though, he's got to deal with this pawn here in the center. So he's still working on his goals and his plans. So in the game right here, b6 was played, and which has a tactical idea of playing bishop to a6, attacking this rook that's kind of pinned in here on f1. Just going back one move, all black had to do was play f5, and his position would have been roughly equal. That move would have reinforced the pawn here on e4. So white would have had to come up with another way of figuring out how he can break through in the center. f3 would have been that way. E takes f, knight takes. So both players would be happy at this point. The game is relatively even. White got his plan off of opening up the center, and he's pushing in the center. Black got his plan off of getting rid of some pieces and having more room. So this would be a very good even game at this point. Let's go back to see what was played in the game. Instead of just solidifying the pawn on e4, black played b6 instead with the tactical threat. Queen a4 stops that threat. Now you have f5, but the difference is the pawn on c6 here is loose. It's unprotected. So then you have f3. White's continuing with his plan of pushing in the center. E takes f, knight takes f, and now white really is threatening to capture this pawn on c6. So bishop b7 protects the pawn, and right now the bishop doesn't have any scope because it's blocked in, but once this pawn is pushed, then the bishop will be on a nice diagonal though. Knight e5, now you have two attackers on the pawn. Queen e6 protects it. Queen c2. Now white is picking at every single weakness in the black camp. So g6 here is probably the best way to defend the two attackers, the queen and the rook that was on the f5 pawn. The only problem with that is that it would have made black's dark squares very weak here. So his king would have been a bit more exposed, but white does not have a dark squared bishop though, so that's one thing he wouldn't have had to worry about. In the game, he played bishop c8. This is a very passive move, retreating the bishop back to the back rank there, and it's disconnecting the rooks here as well. So white continues with his charge, his attack. e4, queen d6. hits the pawn on d4. The rook protects it. Knight e6. Now you have two attackers on the d4 pawn. And the knight finally returns to the game. Let's give a round of applause for the knight coming back into the game. Queen b3. This pins the knight to the king. F takes e. And now how should white continue here at this point? Go ahead, try to look for a good, ambitious, aggressive move from white. How would you continue here? Go ahead, pause the video. I'm going to go ahead and play the move now. Rook f7. Yes, it's a wonderful move here. The rook cannot be captured because it's defended by the knight. So if you have knight takes d4 here, do you guys see why this doesn't work? It's hitting the queen, trying to get the queen off of this diagonal. You just have rook f8 check, and it's a double check by the queen and the rook. So the king has to take, and then you have checkmate. Queen takes, queen f7 checkmate. So knight captures d4 does not work. So black plays a5 instead, and this is threatening to push the queen off of this diagonal. But this is way too slow. I mean, this is just the slowest move in the entire history of chess. So now you have knight takes e4, and black actually resigned right here. It's just too good. You guys, do you see why black resigned? Of course he has to move his queen, right? Play might have continued like this. Let's say he goes to d5. But then you have rook takes g7, tearing open the black king side. And let me just give you a few examples of what might have happened. If the knight would take on g7, then you have knight f6, which forks the king and queen. That's just a done deal. So then if the king takes on g7, now you have queen g3, check. And then there's forced mates come in regardless of where the king goes. Like if the king goes to h6, then you have knight f7, check, king h5, knight f6, checkmate. If the king goes to f8, now you have rook f1, check, with mates to follow. King e7, queen h4, the knight blocks, free piece, and check. King e6, queen f6, checkmate. So let's go back. If the king blocks the check with knight g5, then this is actually black's best chance here. But that still leads to some forced mates. Let me just give you a couple here. Queen takes knight, king f8, rook f1 check, bishop blocks. So black's just having to give up, his pieces to try to stop the checkmate. Queen goes to f7, rook takes, checkmate. So guys, I hope you enjoyed that game today. The great Mikhail Botvinnik, the former world champion, he played a fantastic game. I definitely encourage you guys to try out the exchange variation of the Queen's Gambit decline. There's two main ideas to remember. You can either go for the minority attack on the queen side, or you can build up and play for the central attack with f3 and g4. So there's a couple ideas that you can go for without having to memorize, 20 moves of theory as in the other variations in the Queen's Gambit decline. So, okay guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you next time.